They fined me for building a roof that could save lives, said it didn't match the community aesthetic, said my angles were too aggressive, that safety came second to symmetry. But I'd seen what 5 tons of wet Colorado snow does to a house not built to fight back, and I wasn't about to let my family become a headline just to keep the neighborhood looking like a catalog. You never forget the sound of a roof giving way. It's not a sudden crack like lightning or the thud of a falling tree. It's slower, more deliberate, a deep, mournful groan as if the house itself is sighing its last breath before the timber snaps and the sky falls into your living room. I heard that sound 10 years ago in a small town 2 valleys over, where a family of 4 was buried in their sleep and only the father crawled out, and those blurry newspaper photos of 2 little girls, the same ages as the daughters I didn't even have yet, burned into my retina like a brand. My name is Garrett Weller, and when Amanda and I bought our place on the edge of Golden Timber Estates 8 years ago, I had one non-negotiable demand for the builder. The roof would be built my way, engineered by my hands, and rated for a goddamn apocalypse. I'm not an architect by trade, but I spent 22 years in the Army Corps of Engineers, most of it in high-altitude posts and combat zones where the shelter over your head was the only thing keeping the outside from becoming your forever, so I didn't care about visual harmony. I sketched the design on graph paper in the dim light of our temporary apartment. A 43-degree pitch, standing seam metal in a quiet silver tone, reinforced trusses rated for twice the county maximum, and strategically placed snow guards to release the weight in controlled sheets instead of lethal slabs. The HOA might have something to say about that, the builder told me, raising an eyebrow at the steep, metallic silhouette, but I just looked him in the eye and told him my family's safety wasn't up for a neighborhood vote. For the first few years, it was fine. The neighbors even seemed impressed when the first real snowfall hit, and my roof hummed with a soft, rhythmic whisper, shush, 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 as the snow let go in long, graceful curtains, landing in neat piles far from the foundation while their gutters groaned under the weight of ice dams. My neighbor Greg Hastings even clapped me on the shoulder one day while we were shoveling, saying it was a smart move and he might steal the idea. But then came the spring of the red coat. Karen Delaney, the new HOA board president, appeared on my driveway one March afternoon, her red blazer standing out against the melting slush like a warning flag, clipboard in hand and sunglasses perched in perfectly styled hair despite the overcast sky. She didn't come to welcome us to the new season. She came to talk about inconsistencies, gesturing vaguely at my roofline like it was a stain on a white carpet. The CC and RS are quite clear on visual uniformity. Mr. Weller, she said with a smile that never reached her eyes, the pitch and material deviate from the community's approved palette, and we've had comments. I leaned on my shovel, feeling that old familiar calm settle over me. The kind of stillness I used to wear in briefings before a dangerous mission, and I told her straight to her face that the CC and RS don't mention snow load engineering or the structural integrity of a home during a blizzard. Ma'am, this roof is designed to keep my daughters alive, I said, but she just tapped her pen against the clipboard, making a little tink-tink-tink sound that felt like a countdown, and replied that county codes aren't our concern. Community standards are. 2 weeks later, the first certified letter arrived, the kind of thick envelope that feels heavier than paper has any right to be, and inside was a formal violation notice, a demand to submit a redesign plan within 30 days, and a $500 fine that was just the opening shot. Amanda read it over my shoulder, her breath hitching as she saw the grainy photos they'd taken of our house from across the street, and she asked if I thought it would come to a fight. I looked out the kitchen window at Molly and Lucy, then 4 and 6, pressing their noses to the glass and squealing at the snow waterfalls my roof created, and I knew right then that I'd burn every cent I had before I let a woman with a clipboard tell me how to protect them. I turned the garage into a war room, unrolling the blueprints across the workbench and weighting the corners with old brass shell casings, surrounding myself with county permits, stamped engineering calculations, and a growing stack of time-stamped photos. I started a daily log, temperature, snowfall totals, attic humidity, treating this like a deployment because I knew the enemy didn't care about facts. They cared about obedience. Karen's next letter was angrier, threatening forced corrective action by HOA-appointed contractors at our expense. which is just a fancy way of saying they'd send men with crowbars to tear down our shield while we watched. The chill started to seep through the neighborhood walls. June Holstead, who used to trade recipes with Amanda, suddenly found reasons to be inside when we walked by, and Greg Hastings, the man who'd call me smart, now shoveled his driveway with his back turned to us. The girls noticed it first, Lucy coming home with a trembling lip because a kid at school said her daddy was being mean to the neighborhood, and my heart just about broke as I lifted her onto my lap and told her the roof was a slide for the snow, so it wouldn't get too heavy for the house to carry. "Does it protect us, Daddy?" she asked, her small brow furrowed, and when I told her exactly, she wrapped her arms around my neck and said she loved our roof, and that was the moment I stopped caring about being a good neighbor and started being a soldier again. I didn't know then that the storm of the century was brewing in the Arctic, or that Karen Delaney was about to personally sue me in small claims court to bypass the county's independent review board. But as I watched the silver panels of my roof catch the moonlight, I felt a resolve harden in my chest that no fine or lawsuit could ever crack. They wanted a patchwork neighborhood where every shingle matched, but they were about to find out that when the sky turns white and the wind starts to scream, visual harmony won't keep your ceiling from crushing your children in their beds. The legal battle wasn't just about paper anymore. It turned into a psychological siege that felt like living inside a pressure cooker. When Karen Delaney realized I wasn't going to roll over, she didn't just double down. She went personal. She filed a lawsuit in small claims court, claiming my aggressive roof was single-handedly diminishing the property values of every home in Golden Timber Estates. And suddenly, the mailbox wasn't for birthday cards anymore. It was a delivery system for spite. Anonymous notes started showing up, printed pages of the HOA bylaws with the uniformity sections highlighted in a neon yellow that looked like toxic waste. And once, someone even tucked a real estate flyer under my windshield wiper with a circle around a house 3 towns over, as if to say, move while you still can. Amanda tried to stay strong, but I saw the way her hands shook when she poured her morning coffee, and the way she'd pull the curtains shut if a car slowed down too much in front of our house. It was a gray SUV, always idling near the school bus stop. Windows tinted so dark you couldn't see the face behind the wheel, but you could feel the eyes, those cold, judgmental eyes watching my front door, waiting for a slip-up. Then came the Friday night that changed everything. The night the visual harmony crowd decided that paint was the best way to express their frustration. I was helping Molly with her spelling words at the kitchen table when Amanda let out a muffled gasp from the front window. Someone had taken a can of cherry red spray paint to our garage door in the side of my shed, scrawling "conform or leave" in jagged, dripping letters that looked like fresh blood in the glow of the porch light. Lucy started to cry, a small, hollow sound that made my vision go white around the edges, and as I stood there in the driveway, with the chemical smell of the paint hitting the back of my throat, I realized the neighborhood hadn't just turned its back on us. It had turned into a mob. "I'm taking the girls to my sister's," Amanda said that night, her voice flat and hollow as she packed their suitcases. "Just for a while, Garrett, just until this stops." I didn't argue because I couldn't guarantee their peace of mind anymore, even if I could guarantee the roof over their heads. So I watched them drive away into the gathering dusk, their tail lights disappearing like embers in the wind. I stayed behind, a lone sentry in a cavernous house, spending my nights pressure washing the hate off my garage and repainting the beige until my fingers were numb, while the local weather channel started flashing polar vortex in bright red letters across the screen. The storm was 3 days away, a monster rolling down from the Arctic that the meteorologists were calling the Great Whiteout, and while the rest of the neighborhood was busy whispering about my rebellious roof, I was out in the garage, stocking the generator, checking the propane seals, and reinforcing the chicken coop until it looked like a bunker. Karen Delaney's final move before the sky fell was a cease and desist letter, ordering me to cease all defensive modifications and prepare for roof remediation, but I just tucked it into the evidence binder next to the photos of the vandalism. When the first flakes hit on Tuesday, they weren't the pretty, dancing kind. They were heavy, wet, and driven by a wind that sounded like a freight train barreling through the valley. By noon, the world had disappeared behind a curtain of white so thick I couldn't see Greg's house across the street. And by midnight, The power grid finally surrendered, leaving the entire estates in a suffocating, freezing darkness. Except for my house, my generator kicked in with a steady, mechanical heartbeat, and the silver panels of my roof began their quiet, relentless work. I sat in the dark living room, wrapped in a wool blanket, listening to the house. In a normal storm, you hear the muffled thud of snow accumulating, but on my house it was different. Every hour, I'd hear that low, rushing whoosh as another 500 pounds of snow slid down the 43-degree pitch and landed harmlessly in the yard. But then around 3 a.m., I heard the other sound, the sound from my nightmares. Crack. It was distant, but sharp, followed by a low, grinding groan that vibrated through the floorboards. I pulled up my security feeds on the battery-powered monitor and saw a ghost-white nightmare. The Dalton's back deck roof had folded like a cardboard box under a 6-foot drift. 10 minutes later, another feed caught the shadow of a gutter being ripped off the McCaffrey house, taking the wood fascia with it in a slow-motion avalanche of ice. I suited up, parka, goggles, heavy gloves, and stepped out into the chaos just as the sun should have been rising, though the sky was nothing but iron-gray fury. The drifts were waist-high, the wind stealing my breath before I could even take it, and as I struggled toward the street, I heard a thin, desperate cry for help. It was coming from Karen Delaney's driveway. There she was, the woman who had tried to sue me into oblivion, kneeling in the snow with a plastic toy store shovel, frantically digging at her garage door while the heavy wooden awning above her sagged at a sickening angle. Her luxury SUV was crushed beneath a mountain of white, the rear window shattered, and as she looked up at me, her face was pale, her lips blue, and the uniformity she'd fought so hard for was nothing but a graveyard of twisted metal and frozen shingles. "Garrett," she gasped, her voice cracking, "the awning's gonna go. My house is groaning. Please." I looked at her roof, the shallow, aesthetic pitch she demanded everyone follow, and it was loaded with nearly 4 feet of wet, cement-like snow that was literally crushing the life out of her rafters. I had every reason to turn around and walk back to my warm, safe bunker, but I thought of those 2 little girls from 10 years ago, and I realized that being right doesn't mean anything if you let someone die just to prove a point. I handed her my heavy aluminum shovel and told her to get back. Then I spent the next 4 hours on a ladder in the middle of a blizzard, raking the weight off her roof one agonizing layer at a time. Every time a slab let go, the house would shudder, and I could hear the timber screaming under the sudden shift in pressure. But eventually, the danger receded. I didn't say a word to her when I climbed down. I just grabbed my gear and moved to the next house. And then the next, because Greg's roof was leaking in 3 rooms, and June Holstead's sunroom had already shattered inward like a broken light bulb. By the time the emergency snowcats arrived at dusk, I was a walking block of ice, my shoulders burning with a fire I haven't felt since my last deployment. But as the fire lieutenant looked up at my silver roof, standing tall and pristine, while every other house on the block looked like it had been punched by a giant, he just shook his head and said, "I wish more people had been difficult like you, soldier." The storm was far from over, but the neighborhood's harmony had been replaced by a much louder, much grimmer reality, and the man they called a problem was the only reason half of them still had a ceiling over their heads. Morning broke with a brilliance that was almost offensive, that sharp, unforgiving Colorado sun that turns 1 billion tons of snow into a mirror that blinds you if you dare to look. I stepped out onto my porch with a mug of coffee that I actually had time to finish, and I just stood there, breathing in the cold, metallic air. Golden Timber Estates looked like a battleground where the sky had won. Orange caution tape fluttered from collapsed carports, and the sound of distant chainsaws began to chew through the silence. My house, though, it stood there like a silver-crowned king in a graveyard of beige, the foundation surrounded by perfect, symmetrical fans of shed snow, while my neighbors' homes looked like they were being slowly crushed by invisible hands. The first person to walk up my driveway wasn't a process server or a board member. It was Greg Hastings. He looked 10 years older than he had 3 days ago, his face raw from the wind and his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there looking at my roof, then at his own, where a massive blue tarp was already being nailed over a gaping hole in his ridge beam. "Garrett," he finally said, his voice raspy, "I voted against you at that emergency meeting. I was scared of being the next one fined, scared of being the outsider. I'm sorry, man. I did what was easy, and now my son is sleeping in the living room because his bedroom ceiling is in his closet." I looked at him, really looked at him, and I didn't feel the surge of "I told you so" that I expected. I just felt a heavy, tired empathy. "Fear is a hell of a motivator, Greg," I said, handing him the rest of my coffee. "But fear doesn't hold up 5 tons of snow. Come on, let's go see if we can patch that hole before the melt starts." Word traveled through the slush faster than the salt trucks. By noon, the McCaffreys had left a note on my porch weighted with a rock. "We were wrong. Thank you for standing your ground." June Holstead sent over a tray of lasagna with her nephew, along with a message asking if I'd look at her rebuild plans to make sure her new sunroom actually works. The neighborhood was finally looking up, literally, and they didn't like what they saw in their own designs anymore. But the final note in the symphony of the blizzard happened that evening. A soft knock on my front door revealed Karen Delaney. She wasn't wearing the red blazer. She was wrapped in a coat that looked 3 sizes too big, and her eyes were hollow. She didn't try to smile. She just handed me a single, folded sheet of heavy stationery, a formal resignation from the HOA presidency, effective immediately. "They're already blaming me," she whispered, her breath fogging in the dusk, "for the rules, for the delays, for everything. I thought uniformity meant value." "Garrett, I genuinely thought I was protecting the community." "You were protecting a picture, Karen," I said, not unkindly. "I was protecting the people inside the frame. There's a difference." She nodded once, a small, broken movement, and walked back to her house through the deep ruts in the snow. She sold her place 3 weeks later and moved to Fort Collins. I never saw the gray SUV again. Amanda and the girls came home on Sunday, and the way Molly and Lucy screamed, "Daddy, save the house," as they ran to hug the silver siding. Well, that was the only engineering stamp I ever really needed. We didn't just go back to normal, though. We changed the normal. Greg took over as interim president, and at the first meeting, the community center was packed. There were no clipboards, no aesthetic palettes, and no talk of visual harmony. We spent 3 hours talking about pitch angles, truss spacing, and the Weller standard for snow shedding. The vote to strike the uniformity clauses from the bylaws was unanimous, followed by a new rule that stood as a testament to the storm. No aesthetic regulation shall ever supersede structural safety or human life. I spent the next year consulting for free on every single roof rebuild in the estates. If you drive through Golden Timber now, it doesn't look like a catalog anymore. It looks like a patchwork of silver, charcoal, and forest green with steep pitches and gleaming snow guards. It looks like a place where people learned that being a good neighbor means looking out for the person next door, not just making sure their shingles match yours. I still have that evidence binder in the fireproof safe, but I added a new page at the very end. It's a photo of Lucy's drawing, the one with the big silver triangle roof and the stick figure family underneath. And across the top, in her messy 6-year-old handwriting, it says, "The strongest house in the world." Sometimes the world demands that you stay small, that you stay silent, and that you follow the rules even when the rules are broken. But I'm here to tell you that sometimes breaking those rules is the only thing that keeps the world from falling in on you. So let's get into it. Was I the hero for standing my ground? Or was I just a difficult neighbor who got lucky with a storm? Have you ever had an HOA try to tell you that your safety wasn't as important as their aesthetic? And most importantly, would you have climbed that ladder to help the person who spent months trying to destroy you? Drop your stories in the comments. Let's talk about where the line between community and control really lies. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep your head up, especially when the snow starts to fall.